Hello. Dooku gave the Death Star plans to his master, so instead, what if Dooku secretly constructed the Death Star? Would he be able to accomplish the task in secrecy, or would he be able to finish it by the end of the Clone Wars? If so, how would he use it? Special thanks to Lightsabers for sponsoring our 75,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. All the details are in the pinned comment down below.
Our story begins in 27 BBY. Count Dooku is currently gathering up his future separatist forces. It had been 5 years since the blockade over Naboo. He knew that he was the most crucial piece to Palpatine's plan. The Dark Lord was building himself a coalition of support within the Republic. Dooku was tasked with doing the exact same thing, but for a warring faction called the Separatists. It was said by Sidious that Dooku would join him in the new Empire in the future, but even Dooku knew that that was a falsehood. Palpatine only ever cared about himself, and Dooku, in the fashion of the Sith, prepared for his master's downfall. In reality and all actuality, Dooku didn't even care for the traditions of the Sith. He may have been Lord Tyrannus, but his main reason for joining the Sith is that they more closely represented his ideals. With Qui-Gon dead, the hope for the Jedi Order was gone, and as Dooku frequently said about his former master Yoda to Sidious, is that no being can hold such power for so long without becoming complacent at best or corrupt at worst. Dooku knew that Yoda sat on the fine line of the latter half of that statement, and that the Jedi did as well. The Republic was far worse off, and Dooku's only goal was to bring peace and justice to the galaxy, as were the final words he said to Yaddle before killing her mercilessly. Dooku was building up his CIS, and aside from the Trade Federation, he was starting a new potential ally in the Geonosian manufacturers on the planet of Geonosis. The bugs had great facilities, ones that could construct millions of battle droids, which is exactly what Dooku needed for a coming war. At the moment, he had a funding from his new allies in the banking clans, and in the Commerce Guild as well. However, one that currently evaded him was the Techno Union. That was all besides the point. After all, Dooku was a fine negotiator, which is something that clearly passed down from him all the way down to Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. On Geonosis, Dooku had a conversation with Poggle the Lesser, and everything was going well, until Poggle suggested to Dooku that the Separatists use a blueprint he and a grouping of his best engineers came up with. Dooku was confused. On the hologram, it was just a big sphere. But then it was said to Dooku that there was a super weapon. It was a super weapon that could just obliterate an entire planet. The Count liked the idea. It wouldn't help with just wiping out the Republic, but it would also assist in the destruction of Palpatine. With another super weapon under construction on the far side of the galaxy on the Pente docking yards called the Malevolence, Pente could be used as a good hiding place to build another one. The weapon on Pente was being designed and built by the Corran, which Dooku foresaw as a useful ally against the Mon Cala for the future Clone War. Poggle told Dooku that he would sell the blueprints for a large sum of money, to which Dooku suggested that instead of getting the blueprints, he paid the Geonosian workers to construct the weapon here over Geonosis, of course handing the blueprints to him so that he could divide it up. Poggle didn't understand, but as Dooku explained it, he didn't want the Republic or pirates to find it, especially during a war. It would be better to keep such a project hidden. Instead of using prominent worlds, the Separatists would use Pente, Hypore, Geonosis, and Molinist. Of course, the plan was to construct the most functioning piece at Geonosis, move it to Hypore, which was just a skip away, and then when the two pieces were placed together, they could move it all together to the other planets and have a functioning weapon at the end. It also helped that Dooku knew the plans for how the Clone Wars would operate. If he could design the weapon in the format he wanted and needed it, then it would go perfectly according to his plans. The biggest question was how would it function, to which Poggle informed him that it ran normally. However, its super weapon required a kyber crystal, one of massive sizes. Dooku looked precariously at the Geonosian, trying to understand what that could possibly mean, but Poggle didn't stutter. How or where would Dooku get such a kyber crystal from? Suppose he would have to do some secret homework, but with the weapon seemingly in his hands, he borrowed a massive, secretly woven loan from the banking clans to have it constructed. Dooku's promise for the Separatists were essentially the industrial domination over the galaxy. All these corporate groups would thrive in a galaxy without the Republic, especially without the cruelty that was Chancellor Palpatine, to which Dooku assured his constituents that Palpatine would not be felt in no time. The plans would go underway, as the best engineers and scientists from across the Commerce Guild, Geonosis, Trade Federation, banking clans, the corporate alliances, and finally after hard work the Techno Union came together. All of these groups began to contribute to these properties across the galaxy. The Trade Federation, thanks to Nute Gunray, would station massive fleets fleets outside of the corresponding systems, which Sidious understood as simple fleet movements. Now, Dooku knew Sidious wasn't stupid. He was the brightest mind of a generation. He was a Sith Lord who seriously could destroy the Jedi, and while that was fine and all, Dooku had to be smarter. He couldn't allow Sidious to outsmart him in this intergalactic game of Dejarik. Dooku stationed himself softly, and wherever there was a comeuppance, it would be explained away, duly by the brilliance of Dooku. He was really good at moving Sidious's attention away from everything, Molinus, Pemont, Hypori, and Geonosis especially. Because Sidious, to a degree, trusted Dooku, he as Darth Sidious didn't need to go and visit the Techno-Union banking clan or whatnot. Why would he? He wasn't inspecting the troops or ensuring their loyalty, he had Dooku for that, and Sidious readily kept Dooku in line, summoning Dooku to his hidden lair on Coruscant and conducting rituals. Similarly to his master, Sidious had an obsession with the Force. However, he was more keen on controlling it. Something Sidious feared was Mother Talzin. She was, aside from Yoda, a rival avatar in the Force. She may have not been a combatant, but she was a powerful witch, and Sidious never really understood how she got that powerful. The constant lesson that the Sith never learned, and something Dooku realized early on, is that the Sith were always bound to fail. Their essence in the Force would only hurt them because they themselves hurt the Force. However, someone like Mother Talzin could use the Force in accordance to it and not harm it. Therefore, she was not a leech or a poison on the Force itself. She worked in unity with it, therefore she was powerful. Yoda did as well. However, thanks to the Jedi, he limited himself and his possible power by restricting it to purely the light. The dark side wasn't inherently bad, however, the way it was used and utilized could be. Force magic, which the Night Sisters used, was the dark side, but it did not harm the Force as a whole, something Sidious never figured out, despite all of his continuous efforts to learn about the Force and even an ability called essence transfer. With Sidious's interest in the Separatists and their formation derailed by his focus on learning on the Force, and his continued need to build allies within the Galactic Senate, he had little time to concern himself with what Dooku was doing. However, the Count didn't stop there to ensure his plans went unnoticed. He overwhelmed Sidious with information, stuff he could never really keep up with, using the Zygerians to piss off Skywalker, vying for control of Hutt's space when the war started, engaging another civil war on Mandalore with the Death Watch and the Duchess of Satine, starting a civil war on the planet of Mon Cala between two powerful species, the Mon Cala and the Corran, and so many more, even down to the last detail of border disputes that could aid the Republic in crumbling. It was all elaborately crafted by Dooku for Palpatine to ensure that there was no question about his loyalty. While Count Dooku knew as a Force user he would never become more powerful than his master, he was aware that if he could use his saber or his mind, he could outplay him. That was his entire goal. It wasn't revenge that made him want this, it was something far greater, the achievement that not even Sidious or the greatest Sith could achieve. Dooku could bring true order to a forsaken galaxy. The only time his loyalty was questioned was when Dooku brought in 2 new allies for the Separatist movement. Aside from starting the construction of a super weapon, called at this moment the Death Star in secrecy, Dooku had many plans, readily taking Palpatine's attention away from it. The Malevolence was the most important one, but there were 2 individuals joining the ranks of the CIS to assist with their cause, a Kalish cyborg who now donned the name Grievous, and a former Jedi named Ventress. These 2 assets, as Dooku referred to them, would be crucial in their war effort. Sidious actually really liked the idea of Grievous, a cyborg general leading an army of droids. As a Kalish warrior, he would thrive in an environment of which thrived on the deaths of the Jedi. However, the idea of a witch turned Jedi turned Sith acolyte didn't sit well in his mind. She would be instead, in Sidious's mind, nothing but a tool to extract hate out of Skywalker. She would be the perfect adversary for young Skywalker. After all, she was only a couple years younger than Anakin's master. It would be the perfect practice for someone like Anakin when the time came to kill Kenobi, being that if he survived Order 66, of course. Dooku wasn't yet sold on the idea of killing Kenobi. Of course, he agreed in the moment and showed no hesitation towards agreeing with Sidious, but truthfully, Dooku wanted allies. He wasn't going to continue the line of Sith. He was going to start a new order, one that could bring Kenobi in, or maybe even Windu, or at the very last resort Skywalker. It would be allies to join his cause at the very least. That's all that mattered to him, not the soul-sucking abyss of the narcissistic leader that was Palpatine. A year after Asajj joined the ranks of the CIS, Geonosis would be visited by an intruder, one who went through an asteroid belt following bounty hunter Jango Fett. When Dooku realized the planet had been discovered, he mounted up a fleet and they were dispatched towards Hypori, just a small jump away. Currently, the Death Star was just a husk of junk thrown together, of course structurally sound enough to survive a flight through hyperspace, but for the most part it looked like a no-good space station, if even that. that. There were pieces that were kind of protruding, but again, they were structurally sound enough to move through hyperspace, which is all that mattered. Currently, the Superstation wasn't even being operated by living life forms, and so the only beings on it were battle droids, which helped with one important factor. The space station could be massive, but it also didn't need living facilities, architecture to ensure breathing organisms could live on it, or really any of the extra supplies one station would need if it were to be outfitted with living individuals. Of course, there'd be a section of the ship designed for that, but it wouldn't be implemented until their third stop at Pente. Regardless, with the ship on its way to Hypori, Dooku would confront Kenobi and learn that the Jedi General had absolutely no interest in relinquishing his ways to the Jedi Order. This, of course, was saddening, Dooku under the misconception that Qui-Gon would have joined him or even agreed with him. When the Clone Wars began in the coming planetary rotation, Dooku truthfully wasn't ready. He knew it was coming, but the force of which the Jedi came, he wasn't at all prepared to face. They came ready for a fight and the Separatists were unprepared, which led Dooku to worry about the Death Star over Hypori. It was so close to Geonosis that if the Republic decided to bounce over a star system, it would be discovered and destroyed. And the issue is that the weapon couldn't be moved at the moment because it wouldn't be able to withstand the pressures of hyperspace as they were connecting the pieces. The Death Star was adding the bottom part. Currently, the middle layer is all that was built at Geonosis, and they were going to add the bottom layer, which essentially was one half of the sphere. The other half would be mounted on before the weapon went to Molinist, which would be the final stop for the station. The Separatist fleet that retreated to Hypori would report to Dooku that the Republic seemed to have discovered their location by learning of scouts dropping in and reporting back to Kamino. Dooku learned of this after his meeting with Sidious on Coruscant, so in a bold move, he requested that the bottom layer be deconstructed and moved to another planet far away. The Separatists could do that, but it meant that it would further delay the construction of the space station. That didn't matter to Dooku though. What mattered was completing its construction without Sidious learning of it. So they followed orders. The bottom layer was torn apart and the first layer, which was constructed on Geonosis, was sent to Pente, where the Malevolence was currently being finished. It would provide the perfect cover, especially being that Palpatine was eager to see the new super starship called the Malevolence. It was of course his plans to use the design on Imperial vessels in the future, and if it worked, it would become the base of the Imperial naval structure. This of course wouldn't happen when a few weeks later, after crawling off the assembly line, General Grievous lost the ship and it crashed down onto a moon. Dooku had to plan fast. He knew he needed the Kyber crystal for the super weapon, so he planned accordingly. The Separatists were set to lead an invasion on Megiddo, and there was a planet just outside of Megiddo that was already familiar territory for the Separatists, a planet called Kaylee, where General Grievous was from. Dooku dispatched the broken up pieces of the Death Star to Kaylee while the rest of the weapon was worked on in Pente and then on Molinist. The perfect thing is that the top and the bottom were essentially interchangeable, and the most important piece, being the placement of the weapon's disc, would take place on Molinist, so the chances of failure over Hypori, derailing the project past the Clone Wars, were highly unlikely. With the Separatist fleet in quotations stationed over Kaylee to protect Grievous's people from the Republic, everything was back on track. Of course, nothing is meant to last forever, as Dooku in the early parts of the second year was forced to execute his apprentice to prove his loyalty to his master. This was a final straw for Dooku. He decided that Sidious would die, but now his death would be much more painful than it would have otherwise. In trying to conceal his plans for the future, he went along with it. There of course were several instances where Palpatine questioned Dooku's loyalty. The failure on Toydaria, the security of Jabba's son on Teth, the destruction of the Malevolence, the failure of the Death Watch to stop Duchess Satine, which would have crippled her 1500 star system coalition of neutrality. It seemed at every turn his loyalty was being disproven, but Sidious dealt with it. He just wanted Dooku for one thing: teasing Skywalker. The Chosen One would become his future pupil, and a powerful one at that. So Dooku was just being used to fuel Skywalker's rage, in hopes that Anakin would dispose of Dooku by happenstance. It didn't happen, but it only enraged Dooku more. Though at the same time he couldn't help but laugh it off, knowing that his plans were coming to fruition as the Death Star was moved from Pente to Molinist, where the space station's weapons ring would be placed. While the Death Star was missing the bottom half, it was perfectly fine. Everything would go as planned. It wouldn't take much more than a couple of weeks to secure the topmost half of the super weapon, and then the rest of the massive vessel would be moved to Kaylee. With this move, the Separatists would strike at Megiddo. While Dooku had been using scavengers and groupings of pirate fleets paid off by his personal estate to collect Kyber crystals from Ilum, Jeddah, and a number of other locations across the galaxy, he was also heavily reliant on one special Kyber crystal located on Megiddo. With the Republic jumping down after them, all he had to do was be patient. As the Jedi Council dispatched Ki-Adi-Mundi to lead the assault on Megiddo, Dooku now realized how intense the situation was becoming, especially as it seemed that the end of the Clone Wars were starting to loom closer and closer. And while the Death Star was structurally complete, he needed the Kyber crystal so that he could run a concentrated test with the weapon, so he knew that it was ready and prepared for battle. It would take a number of months to get the Kyber crystal discreetly removed from Megiddo in the heat of the siege. By this time, the Death Star was a fully constructed sphere, and everything was placed right where it needed to be. It was perfect timing too. Dooku moved himself to his new battle station and had the weapon fire single reactor ignition on Kaylee, which would effectively wipe out the remainder of Grievous's people. Of course, Grievous was completely unaware. He was currently using the Invisible Hand and currently leading an attack on Coruscant, right after he captured the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. With everything in motion, the Death Star was rerouted from Kaylee and sent to Coruscant. With the battle heating up, Dooku sent a transmission to General Grievous to inform him that the Chancellor were to be executed at the end of 30 minutes. There would be no need for him anymore. Grievous thought the timing to be a little bit odd, but he listened, and when the time came, he and his guard moved for the Chancellor's prison, on the top of the Invisible Hand. Palpatine had no issue with this. Seemingly, it was just all a part of the plan. Anakin and Obi-Wan would come and save him, and then everything would be alright. When Grievous came in, he just assumed it was a pawn ceremony. Not to mention, Sidious could sense that Skywalker just exited hyperspace with a new deployment of battle-ready vessels. Obi-Wan and Anakin were leading their own mission to rescue the Chancellor of the Republic. As Grievous walked down the steps to a bemused Palpatine, assuming that Grievous would just simply be killed here instead of Dooku, he didn't really mind the company. Sidious just thought to himself that he would send Dooku to Utapau instead. Dooku would kill Kenobi or whatever, other Jedi would be sent, and whatever. Dooku would die during the clone invasion, no biggie. Because both Dooku and Grievous at this point were interchangeable parts in his plan. All of a sudden, Sidious pulled his chair around, feeling some great disturbance in the Force. The entire battle stopped when a massive superstructure emerged from hyperspace. Dooku stood in the only airlock area in the vessel, the command room, as he insisted that the super tactical droid prepare to destroy the planet. Ironically, by this point, Sidious had actually seen the blueprints, and he was completely aware of the Death Star concept. However, it was something he just never showed the Dooku. Ironic. He hid it from his apprentice, and his apprentice hid it from him. Not even Palpatine could be disappointed with this effort. The last thing Palpatine would see was a green laser spinning around the circle of the Death Star's main cannon. His chest would be impaled before he could see what the superstructure could do. The blast from the Death Star was perfectly targeted, avoiding all sorts of ships and vessels in the way and connecting with Coruscant. Dooku knew what he was doing. He was tearing down the little establishment that remained. Within moments, the entire planet of Coruscant exploded, killing 1 trillion citizens. The entire Galactic Senate, including Padme Amidala and her closest allies, destroying the Jedi Temple, killing everyone inside of it, and of course most tragically the death and destruction of Anakin's protocol droid C-3PO. It was a most tragic loss for the galaxy, especially C-3PO, and Dooku couldn't care less. With the planet destroyed, he rerouted and abandoned the battle. Grievous watched as debris from the planet exploded out. The Separatists had plenty of resources to continue a war, but the Republic would now have a great issue. For Skywalker and Kenobi, they would be awestruck. They couldn't believe it. Anakin was blinded by revenge, but the Death Star vanished. The Separatist fleet began moving out. Whichever ships weren't completely destroyed by the floating chunks of debris were able to escape. The Republic, on the other hand, suffered the most from this. While no one in the Separatist ranks were aware of the Death Star or its approach, the super tactical droid issued out commands to the rest of the fleet, which was quickly taken in and used. Being that a majority of the Separatist fleet was controlled by droids, there was no problem. They all reacted quickly and moved out. The Republic fleet, on the other hand, was controlled by organics, and they were completely thrown off. Their ships were smashed to pieces by debris as the 3 highest-ranking individuals in space tried to issue out orders, those being Jedi Generals Skywalker, Kenobi, and Saesee Tiin. Just to make the show-up of the Republic fleet even worse, the Republic Star Destroyer models and Victory-class Star Destroyers would deploy, many of them ending up being destroyed by the debris still cascading into space from Coruscant. The Republic would be in a state of chaos. Their entire structure crumbled, and they tried to pick up the pieces as fast as they could. Dooku saw smoke in the water, and he jumped on it. He knew strategically that the Jedi were no longer his concern. He also knew that the Republic militaristically was not a concern as well, being that the Jedi and their troops were spread out across the galaxy. As Dooku mounted up forces to continue his great counter-assault to the Outer Rim sieges, the remaining council members would group up to discuss what to do. The only survivors of the council were of course the 2 from Coruscant, Saesee Tiin and Obi-Wan, while Ki-Adi-Mundi was on Megiddo, Plo Koon on Cato Nemodia, and Depa Billaba was on Kalar. The issue for Mundi, Plo, and Depa was that they could feel the loss of life, and there was genuine concern amongst them that it would open a wound in the Force, similar to that of Nihilus having been created from the mass array of death at Malachor so many years beforehand. They immediately got into a brainstorming session. How could they combat the Separatists? The Republic still had a fine military, and it hadn't yet been revealed that the Separatists were hiding their real forces and their real numbers. The Jedi had to make a decision. Not that they were the end-all be-all of the Republic, but technically and militaristically they had a great amount of influence. Plo Koon Kun, being the oldest surviving member of the High Council, would become the interim Grand Master of the Jedi Order. But before he could even consider issuing out orders, the Death Star arrived over Republic world Chandrilia. Currently, Republic senators, diplomats, and survivors were making their way there to try and reform some sense of governance for the Republic. Dooku was well aware of this, and he parked the Death Star right outside, informing the Republic that they should surrender. No one else needed to suffer. Even more than that, Dooku didn't want anyone to suffer. The only reason he was alright with sacrificing 1 trillion lives is that because Coruscant was insanely corrupt. The Jedi, the Republic, the rich on top of the planet, and the scum that littered the rest of the city from the topmost layer all the way down, thousands of levels below. It was all a hive of terrible individuals, and its stench infected the galaxy. That much Dooku believed to be true. Regardless, as Plo saw this, he confronted Republic High Command, informing them that there needed to be an immediate surrender. 2 individuals within the meeting would not stand for it, one of them being the ever-so-irritable Admiral Tarkin, who had ascended the ranks thanks to his loyalty to Palpatine, and Anakin Skywalker, who wouldn't confess why he was consistently having a conniption. Well, his wife was dead, and even though he was unaware of the child, he couldn't hide his emotions. When he was demanded to stand down, because it could badly affect the people of Chandrilia, he didn't. Again, a slave to his emotions. Skywalker would group up with a number of Republic leaders who disagreed with Plo Koon's advocacy for caution and surrender, and move in for an attack. While Plo knew that Dooku may have been power-hungry at the moment, he wasn't about to risk 1.2 billion lives that lived on Chandrilia, so he and many Republic officials opted for a ceasefire. Dooku agreed. Skywalker didn't see the bigger picture, and so when he and a massive Republic fleet led by Admiral Tarkin and a number of other Republican forces emerged over Chandrilia, they only sealed their fate. Dooku expected this, especially from Skywalker, so when he and his fleets arrived, their doom had been sealed. Dooku's plan was set forward, and the Death Star, which was currently sitting unprotected by no fleet, fired a full reactor blast into the planet of Chandrilia, forcing the entire planet's population to explode. Skywalker, who was leading his men on the assault, pressed a forward assault on the superweapon. Dooku's trap had already been laid, and with the planet wiped out, the Death Star moved to another core world, and for the Republic forces, they were met with suffering. The moment the Death Star jumped into hyperspace, a counter fleet, which was stationed just a little ways away, jumped into the range of the Republic fleet. It was terrible, and not even the best of the best could have survived. While the fleet didn't have an interdictor-class vessel, the Republic fleet was stuck between the asteroid field that was now Chandrilia and a fleet double the size of what had attacked Coruscant a couple days before. It was a slaughterfest. Tarkin, Skywalker, and thousands upon thousands of clones were massacred. No one really knew what happened to Skywalker during the battle. Many would speculate for generations, wondering if he had gone in and died when the battle first started, or if he had to live with his miscalculations after seeing hundreds of his own men die, and then watch his admiral's flagship be ripped apart before he himself found a cold and cruel death. The losses at Chandrilia were substantial, not just for the Republic, but for the galaxy. There was outrage from the Separatist government for Dooku's action, and that, in his mind, was the point. So, with the ceasefire finally accepted by the Republic, the Separatists and the few surviving, very few representatives of the Republic engaged in conversation. Dooku and his Death Star vanished. What he would leave behind is a message that would play during these debates. The message would reveal Dooku's intentions and why he did them, stating that he never wanted the deaths of so many, and then confessing a lie, to turn himself into a martyr of sorts, telling the people that he joined the Sith and found himself serving the newly elected Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, shortly after the blockade of Naboo. However, with no end in sight to the corruption, it had to be stopped. The Jedi contributed to such corruption, and it also had to be stopped. While Coruscant, Chandrilia, and 3 years of Clone Wars were extreme scenarios, Dooku believed that only from them, peace would begin. The message ended, and with the peace accords on Raxus beginning, the end of the Clone Wars would be in sight, though it would never come in a way that the people expected. The Separatist government would institutionalize a new form of government. It wouldn't be easy, and there would still be several skirmishes, but many of the clones wouldn't see any purpose in a continued fight. There was no real reason to, so they left the Grand Army of the Republic. The Jedi would become outcasts, and while they wouldn't be hunted, their religion would be barred from being around or in the galactic politics, leaving the Jedi under Plo Koon to relocate and decide what their order truly stood for. The people of the galaxy would try and recover, and with all the industrial sector, otherwise known as CIS Army, still around, they'd be forced to hunt down the mastermind behind all the carnage. But Dooku would be gone. He and the Death Star disappeared into the unknown regions. He would deactivate most of the droid crew on the vessel, but leave one one Watcher, one that would restart the engines and the crew if the galaxy ever needed saving again. Dooku would find himself in peace before his final rest, in a hope that the galaxy would find itself change for the better. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Jack Miller, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Matty Studios, Anakin003, Flynn Ben Cease, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button, you know what to do. Earth Episode 5 comes out this Saturday. You don't want to miss it. Order 66 might be happening. Anyways, let's talk about our story today. So, this was, well, catastrophic to say the least, and that is what I was going for. I don't doubt Dooku's ability, and I don't really think he's inept. I think he's really quite smart, and so I wanted to play on that brilliance. I wanted to play on him kind of like seeing him in the lens that we've been shown him, but making him the main character. And I think this is something that my channel does really well at. It's like just prioritizing characters that don't get a lot of screen attention, and I think Dooku is one of those characters that deserves it. And having him have this master plan would be really kind of cool. Now, obviously, it's up for you to decide if what Dooku did was for the better or worse of the galaxy. Obviously, Anakin is a side effect of his plan coming to fruition, but I don't think Anakin would be able to be stopped regardless of who the Grand Master is. I think a group of Rebel Republic people are going to be like, yeah, we're going to fight this, and they're going to show up and get shown up, you know, and I think it would just come unsuspectingly. I don't think for the Jedi it would be as worse as Order 66. I genuinely think the Jedi would make a clear recovery, but for like everyone in the galaxy, I think the shock of watching, you know, 1.1 trillion people die would be kind of enough to be like, you know, maybe we should like come together and not do what we're doing. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Fun story. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.